So first off, just to give a little foundation of who MAPC is for those of you who are not familiar, and I'll introduce myself. I'm Cami Peterson. I'm the Director of Clean Energy at MAPC. And MAPC is the regional planning agency that serves the 101 cities and towns of Greater Boston. We were created by the legislature over 50 years ago, and we're a mission-based public agency toward the mission of smart growth, sustainability, regional coordination, equity, and a number of other types of fields and practices that move our region toward those goals. We represent about half the state's population, about 2/3 of the state's jobs, and we also work statewide on a number of issues. In our clean energy department, the work that we do and that I lead up really relates to energy efficiency, renewable energy, climate mitigation, and resilience around projects, planning, and policy. And we really work toward implementation and working to bring communities together to get the effectiveness of economies of scale and peer-to-peer sharing that can come with collaboration. Provide a lot of technical assistance and education as well, which is one of the things that we are doing today. We've been working a lot in the last 3+ years, I would say, really framing a lot of the work that we do in clean energy and climate in the frame of net zero, and the need to really think about the work that we do, all the planning, the project implementation, and the policy work through that holistic climate planning framework. The reason for that, or one of the many reasons for that, is the multiple benefits that we feel come from having that comprehensive approach to climate planning and kind of seeing net zero as the lens through which to do that work. And then one of the main focus areas through our net zero work is looking at buildings. And that's why many of you are here today, because of the importance of buildings in our work as cities and towns, in our work as a Commonwealth, and the outsized role they play in helping to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions as a Commonwealth. So just a couple quick charts up here from the state. You'll see that since 1990 to 2020, and I've highlighted building consumption in both of these charts, graphs, that building consumption has decreased, as you know, in terms of metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent over those decades, but not by nearly enough. And it still makes up over 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions as a Commonwealth. And that really is looking at the heating and cooling that comes from buildings, because electricity is another sector. And so when you combine both of those, we're generally over 40% of emissions in the Commonwealth currently come from building, electricity, heating, and cooling. So how can we improve our buildings? How, as cities and towns and stakeholders that work with cities and towns, how can we really impact building regulations and work to improve our buildings, make them more climate smart and energy efficient? There are a number of ways. One of them is really interacting at the national scale, and many of you joined with us back in 2019 to vote on and engage with the International Energy Conservation Code. That's America's model energy code, and is one that Massachusetts adopts as our base building energy code. So that's one way, but most of the ways are really much more local here to Massachusetts. Our building code, whether the base building code or the stretch energy code, are statewide. They apply statewide, and they are the only options that cities and towns have to affect new construction and major renovation through the building code. There's also a number of zoning and other local ordinances that cities and towns can adopt, deploy, interact with, and enforce in order to also further climate and energy goals through building stock. So just to touch on a couple of those. So examples of local levers that cities and towns have to move their buildings, to decarbonize them, move them to being more energy efficient and climate smart, are things like building energy use disclosure and reporting ordinances, zoning bylaws and ordinances, or permitting, streamlined inspectional processes that can help to facilitate more solar or on your roof, or white roofs or green roofs, things that can help reduce setback requirements so that building envelopes can be more robust, or clean heating and cooling equipment can be on the outsides of buildings. Cities and towns leading by example, an example here of Amherst and their requirement for town buildings. A number of cities and towns in our Commonwealth have put forth some requirements for their public buildings. So there are a number of things that cities and towns can do at the local level to move forward on their climate goals and reap the multiple benefits that we already referenced that can come from decarbonizing buildings and making them more resilient and climate smart. But there's only so far that goes. Many cities and towns are really hindered by the fact that the building code is statewide, and cities and towns are not allowed to go beyond state building code. The only exception to that is the stretch energy code. Oh, actually, here, I'll move forward here, since that's what I want to touch on just for a second. The stretch energy code is an above code appendix to the base building code. You can see here, over 80% of the Commonwealth cities and towns have adopted it, 284 as of this past August. And it is the only other option in the base or in the building energy code for cities and towns to go beyond the base code in energy. It started off in 2009 when it was first adopted, being 20% more efficient than the base building energy code. Currently, though, it stands at being relatively on par, unless they're a very large commercial building or some very unique uses. Other than that, the stretch energy code has become much less stretchy. Let me take you back a second to the importance of the building energy code. So why do we need the building energy code? Why is that something that if cities and towns had it more at their disposal could be a really useful tool in moving forward on their decarbonization, climate, and energy goals? Well, there's a lot of simple facts that the energy code just improves a home or any building that an occupant is in. There are a number of examples here from efficient lighting, efficient windows, having really good mechanical ventilation, sealing cracks, making sure that if you make your building as tight as it can be, as efficient as it can be, you can downsize the heating, ventilation, and air conditioning equipment that's needed for those buildings. They provide a lot of productivity benefits, whether it's someone working at home or students at a school, those in a workplace. There are a number of ways that energy codes make our buildings safer, more resilient, healthier, more efficient, and then also reduce utility bills. But as I mentioned, here in Massachusetts, there's only so much that we can do to really affect that building code. We are required by statute to adopt and fully integrate that International Energy Conservation Code. That becomes our base building energy code and is adopted basically on a 3-year cycle. There is that ability of the Board of Building Regulations and Standards, which is the body that governs the building energy code here in Massachusetts and building code in general, along with the Department of Energy Resources, to adopt more stringent energy efficiency provisions to that International Energy Conservation Code, that latest code, the IECC. They cannot do anything that diminishes the IECC, but they can adopt, though they don't have to, more stringent energy efficiency provisions. So that's what forms our base building energy code in Massachusetts. Touched on the stretch code as the above code appendix option that cities and towns can and have adopted. But those are our mechanisms on the statewide scale to really be able to affect new construction and major renovation beyond those local levers that I discussed. And it's really a complement of all of those types of levers that we want to bring together as a Commonwealth to get the multiple benefits that can come from decarbonizing our buildings. And so in order to really move the stretch code forward to be much stretchier, to reach the net zero goals that many of us here in the Commonwealth have, been working with a number of partners on alternatives to the current stretch code and how to start to progress it toward a net zero option. And one of the proposals that's been put forward to the Board of Building Regulations and Standards is this Energy Zero Easy code proposal pathway. And that's something that MAPC has been happy to help to support, along with a number of partners, some of which you'll hear from today and others that will be credited as we move through the presentation, and many more that will not, but that have been working in the wings, many practitioners and technical folks in the buildings industry, to try to think about how we design a stretch code pathway that can help move buildings toward net zero, really focusing on energy efficiency as the key, helping our buildings to become electrified and adding renewables to handle any of the energy load that remains. So with that, I want to turn it over to our very abled presenters for today. I'm really glad to be joined today by Meredith Elbaum, the Executive Director of Built Environment Plus, and Jacob Knowles, the Director of Sustainability and Design, or Sustainable Design, sorry, from BR+A. And they're going to walk us through the majority of the components that make up the Energy Zero or Easy Code proposal, and how cities and towns can kind of start to think about these components at a high level, the importance and the role that they could play in helping our buildings to help reach the climate goals that we have here as a Commonwealth. So in order to do that, I'm going to first work to unmute Meredith. Let's see. Okay, Meredith, I think you should be unmuted. Oh, hold on just a sec. You were unmuted, then you got muted again. All right, I think you're unmuted now.
I'm good.
Awesome.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay.
Fabulous. So let me know when you are ready to move on to the next slides. I'll take us to the next one from here.
Okay, great. And I think I'll just pause when I'm ready to move on, Cami, as I said to you. So I'm Meredith Elbaum. I'm the Executive Director of Built Environment Plus. We are a nonprofit focused on driving the sustainability of the built environment. You may know us better as the U.S. Green Building Council of Massachusetts. We rebranded to be Built Environment Plus. And I just want to say thank you to Cami for being here and to Jacob for all the work that he and the rest of the committee or people we've been working with on this. It's been really a fantastic effort. And I want to say we've been approached, I know Cami has too, there are a number of municipalities in Massachusetts who want a net zero code, but because of the way Massachusetts works with a statewide code, we can't have each of the individual municipalities having their own codes. And that's actually a good thing, right? It would be really hard as a designer if every single municipality had a different code. And so having the base code and then the stretch code for the municipalities who want to go a little bit further is a really great approach for our Commonwealth. So at least I'd say it's a little bit over a year ago because we presented a letter which showed support. We got over 100 building industry professional companies and along with 1,500 professional individuals across the building industry to sign on to a letter advocating for a net zero energy code. And we announced this and presented this about October of last year. So it's been a year already, but showing that there's a lot of support in the building community for developing this code and believing that it can happen. And so from there, we pulled together a working group because it wasn't just enough to say we want to have a code. We needed to say, well, what does this code actually look like? And so from that group of people, we pulled together, there's I think over 40 individuals and along with organizations here who worked hard to pull this together. And if you have ever worked in a group in consensus before, it's an incredibly difficult thing. And so what we actually have ended up pulling together and put forth is consensus-based. And I think that proves the rigor of what we're doing and the people who really support the efforts. It's been led by these 5 partners, Built Environment Plus, NEEP, MCAN, MAPC, and Sierra Club have been really the drivers behind this. And so, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. I mean, we all know this. Buildings play a huge role in carbon emissions here in Massachusetts, transportation as well. Important that everyone knows we need to focus on buildings. And when we talk about net zero, here's our definition. And really, I've been thinking about that we need to make this into a Venn diagram, just like our sustainability diagrams, because net zero is really a combination of energy efficiency, then looking at electrification for heat and hot water, and then looking at renewables, and all together. You can't have, really, for our definition of net zero, a building that doesn't have all 3 of these things. We've been getting a lot of pushback about questions about how is this going to add load to the grid and how can we meet this, and it's going to be more affordable, it's going to be costly. If you start with the efficiency piece and you tie all 3 of these together for that definition of net zero, we can get there without increasing loads and having to be cost effective. We're looking at the shift from gas to electric. This is why we're making the shift in terms of the carbon emissions from the electric grid, especially as we start having more renewables on the grid. It's much more efficient and produces less CO2. Electrification of transportation is already getting cleaner, and you can see that that's 75% cleaner, and it's getting cleaner every day. The grid itself, as I just mentioned, we're looking at that is getting cleaner all the time. And so that's part of all of this, is making sure that we, as we have more electrification, the grid is getting cleaner. So all of our emissions go down as well. So we're not the first ones to do this, and we're not alone. There are some precedents, and I'm not going to go into deep detail here, but around the country, there's a whole network of cities and states who are working on this exact issue. Over time, so we have the 2015 ICC codes and the 2018 ICC but that's already with our 2019, or sorry, the stretch code is based on ASHRAE 90.1 2013 with amendments. We're looking to get this into the next code cycle adoption, which is looking to be January 2022. And so I'm just going to summarize this, and I'm going to pass this on to Jacob very shortly to go into some of the details of how this code works. But in summary, it's the three parts. It's the energy efficiency. We have two ways of getting there. Electrification that you have to do after energy efficiency, and then for the remaining, use renewable energy. Jacob's going to go into some of the details. I guess I can also just add here that it's going to be applicable to stretch code towns. This is a key point. We're talking about this being new commercial buildings. This easy code is not residential. This is residential is in another group, and others are looking at that right now. We wanted to start here because this is actually the harder nut to crack, and it's for new commercial buildings over 5,000 square feet.
So,
yeah, Jacob, why don't you take it?
Thanks,
Yeah.
Meredith. Yeah, I'm Jacob Knowles. I'm the Director of Sustainable Design at BR+A Consulting Engineers, and I've been helping lead the charge from the professionals in the industry contributing to develop this code language. So we're basing this on our actual projects, right? Designs we've implemented. So this is real solutions that are practical and available in the market. This slide here is just making it clear that there are different net zero codes that are out there, including one other one that's been submitted to the Board of Building Regulations and Standards in Massachusetts, the board that regulates the code. They are currently looking at another version, and that other version is the AIA Zero code. Now, there's some problems with the Zero code that don't really meet our goals as a Commonwealth to achieve carbon neutral. Number one, the Zero code is a code minimum building. So you're not increasing the efficiency of the building at all. And that doesn't even meet the green community requirements of a stretch energy code. The other is that it allows combustion of fossil fuels, which clearly is not meeting our carbon goals. And then finally, you can use renewable energy for the Zero code that doesn't even meet carbon neutral additionality requirements. So there's some major issues with that approach. And so we've outlined in our approach strategies to address all of those concerns and make a better solution. So let's talk briefly about the energy efficiency section. We don't need to get too technical here, but if you go to the next slide, there's a summary of the requirements. And basically what we're saying is we take the base code and we add an overlay of some additional components that get you to dramatically better energy efficiency in the simplest and easiest path, which is why we call it the easy code. We've developed a prescriptive path that you just do these series of few things, check those boxes, and you now have complied on the energy efficiency section. So some of those things include having a better, higher performing envelope. And primarily that focuses around doing better glass, right? Glass today on a lot of these commercial buildings is very poor performance. You can't even buy performing glass that is this bad in some places like in Europe. So we need to make our windows better. And these are all products that are available on the market. Another is we need to have tighter envelopes for air leakage. And a third big one is to address the energy recovery efficiency. So when you bring ventilation air into the building, you can, for free, recover heat from the air that's leaving the building in your exhaust and avoid having to run boilers to heat that air up. So we'll talk very quickly about a couple of those. In the next slide, we're going to touch on the envelope and the energy recovery. Go ahead. So let's say we take a typical commercial building. This is a building with 3 floors and 30,000 square feet per floor plate. And you see in gray near the top, there's a series of parameters that we use to ensure code compliance for a commercial building if you're following the base code. And if you then click, we've got the comparison to the Energy Zero code. And look at that, we've changed as little as possible. All we updated was making better windows. And when you talk about a commercial building with a large floor plate like this, improving those windows actually gets you to a much better load condition. Go ahead to the next. And I mentioned the other big thing is the ventilation heat recovery. So the code right now is terrible. It only requires 50% effectiveness on your energy recovery. I mean, I can't even remember the last time we specified a system that had only 50%, probably before I got out of college. But if you enhance that, as we're proposing with the easy code, to 80% on the next slide, what's amazing about that is there's multiple manufacturers, multiple technologies out there that can achieve this very easily. It actually warms up the air so much that you basically don't need to add any heat to that ventilation air. You can just bring it into the building, supply it to the space, and just the people and the lights, and computers in the room can do the rest of the warming that needs to happen. Essentially, you don't need to add any heat to that air, which is just a game changer. And that's part of how we make that electrification leap, to getting rid of fossil fuels. So overall, between just those couple of strategies on better envelope and better heat recovery, we are cutting the heating load in half compared to the code minimum. So it's a no-brainer. This is easy stuff. So there's two pathways we've identified. So that one was the easy pathway. That's the prescriptive path. We've also allowed a second pathway, which is the performance path, where you do an energy model instead of just checking those boxes. So you could say, do a little bit worse in some categories and compensate for that in other categories, and use an energy model to document that you still meet the intent of the code. Now, the reason, there's one more thing that we've added, though, to this performance path, which is a prescriptive backstop, which says you can't go too far down the road in terms of worse performance on the envelope or the heat recovery. And there's a reason for that. So the reason for that is this is a chart showing the energy code year after year over time as they get more and more strict with the requirements. But this is basically the base code. And then the Massachusetts stretch code says, okay, you have to do X% better than that. But it's funny because they take a while to adopt the stretch code. You see the orange dots are almost on the same trajectory as the blue dots. So there's really not a lot of benefit to the stretch code currently. It's not very stretchy, as Meredith said. Now, the zero code, as we mentioned, that other code that's out there just matches the base code. And so there's a problem there in that there's no savings from that approach. And they've also used an old baseline. So on the next slide, when you have this big delta between a baseline and your proposed design of the model, there's a lot of room for black box magic in that model to kind of skew the results. So you don't really know what you're getting. So that's why we've added, in addition to the prescriptive path having these check boxes of things you have to do, we said, even if you're going to do an energy model, let's at least make sure you're not going too bad on envelope or too bad on energy recovery, because those are kind of just basic things that are going to be there for the life of the building. We want to make sure that your performance is at least pretty good on those categories. So we've added in blue this prescriptive backstop to the energy model pathway, but it still gives teams options. You can choose prescriptive or the energy model, and everybody likes to have options. So that's our strategy there. Now, all of that energy efficiency gets us ready to do this next big chunk of the easy code, which is electrification. And so learning from Brookline's gas ban, where it passed with almost unanimous vote, is they looked at all of the cases where anybody might cry and say, oh, it's too hard, we can't do this, we can't get rid of gas, electric just isn't ready. They said, fine, Every time there's a case where anybody's going to be worried that they can't do it, let's just give them an exception. Let's just get over that first hurdle in the easiest way possible and say labs and hospitals and big central domestic hot water systems. Fine, you have that exception. You can use gas for those things. But all of the easy stuff, like heating of buildings, typical office buildings and things like that, that's a no-brainer at this point. That's now mandatory in the easy code. You cannot use combustion for anything that's not on this exceptions list. So how is that possible that this is really viable in the market? Well, if you take a large high-rise building, office building, and if you look at the code base, this is how much equipment you're going to need. How many heat pumps are you going to need to heat the building with a heat pump and get off of gas? So it's quite a large number of pieces of equipment if you follow the base code. And I can see why people might have an issue with that. But if you follow the easy code parameters that reduce the loads with those simple, smart strategies of a slightly better envelope and better heat recovery, you cut that number basically in half. And now this is a very achievable amount of heat pumps to go all electric. The other cool thing is, as Meredith said before, people worry, oh, if you make buildings all electric, you're going to melt down the grid. The grid will overload. We can't do all electric buildings. Well, when you're talking about new buildings that have these very low loads per the easy code, you know where the peak happens? It's in the summer. Okay, well, you look at any building today, right, that has a cooling system, the peak load happens in the summer. And what we've done here by reducing the load is we've maintained the heating peak in winter below the cooling peak in summer. So that means that you're not increasing the peak electrical load in any way on the grid because that peak still occurs in the summertime, which it would for any normal building. So there's no more crying about overloading the grid. Now, we know for Governor Baker, there's going to be 600,000 or more electric vehicles in Massachusetts by 2025. So there is absolute demand in the market for power for charging cars. And so all we've done is required 10% of parking spaces to have the EV charging stations installed, and then just have the capacity and pathways for a larger percentage to be able to transition to charging stations in the future.
Thanks, Jacob. So if everyone can hear me again, I'm just going to quickly walk through the renewable energy provisions, and then I'll turn it back to Meredith to talk about the jurisdictional requirements. So in the renewable energy space, really, simply, we're trying to diminish the amount of energy needed, as Jacob and Meredith have just been talking through, and to electrify buildings as much as possible. For that electricity and for the heating and cooling that's still required to power the heat pumps through electricity or to provide some of those through other clean heating and cooling equipment, we're really looking to get rid of fossil fuels in our buildings and just power them with renewable energy. And so we're saying that for this easy code proposal, we really want on-site renewables and off-site renewables to provide 100% of the building energy load, and really prioritizing on-site renewables for a number of reasons. But in cases where it cannot fully provide enough energy for the energy load of that building, or in cases where it just isn't feasible for whatever reason to have on-site renewables, then off-site renewables can be used. In that, we're really saying we want you to really, like we said, prioritize those on-site renewables. And so there's a solar energy system requirement. That solar energy system requirement is met by taking a look at 50% of the roof area of the buildings and saying you have to meet the load for that, as well as 90% of any accessory structures, things like parking garages, that type of thing. And you can do that with rooftop solar, as you see in this picture, or with ground-mounted solar parking canopy solar, or other types of Mass Class 1 renewable energy. Any of those really can be used on-site to meet that requirement. And exceptions to that, if there is no solar-ready zone, or the roof area is shaded to such a degree that it just becomes infeasible. And then again, in complement to that, or if for whatever reason in those cases where no on-site renewable energy can be installed, off-site renewables can be used to supplement or to provide that energy. The big requirement that we have in in the proposal for that is that we want to make sure that that renewable energy is additional renewable energy to the grid. So what that means is that a building would not be able to, there's a number of procurement methods that are spelled out, but what they would not be able to do is buy renewable energy credits from, say, national wind credits out of Texas. Those wind credits exist, those sites have been built, someone's going to buy them, they're inexpensive, they're out there in the market. By buying those RECs, you are not helping to create additional renewable energy on the grid here in New England or in another grid with higher emissions. And that's what we're really looking for, that additional aspect. So all of the procurement methods have that feature where we think there's a very good chance that it's creating new additional renewable energy on the grid. So here's just a quick summary of the 3 major categories that make up the Energy Zero Code in the Net Zero Stretch Code proposal. And then there's a few optional jurisdictional pathways that I'll turn it back to Meredith to talk through. If I can unmute her, let's see here. Oh, there we go.
I think I am unmuted. Okay. So we talked about the 3 primary areas of the code. We have put in some additional things that jurisdictions could adopt additionally if they choose, right? And so as stated, the code does not talk about embodied carbon yet. And so embodied carbon can have a huge impact on the overall, that's the amount of carbon required to actually build the building. It's something that we don't talk about as much, and we're starting to see more people talking about it. So we do have an option in here to calculate embodied carbon, not have a requirement to reduce it, but just even to calculate it. There are other requirements about refrigerants, potentials, commissioning the system, so making sure the ones that are not in addition to the ones that are required in the base code, which means that you're making sure that you're going back and operating the building as intended. It is amazing to me, you would never buy a new car and not bring it back after a year to make sure that it was operating as intended, and that's something that we do with buildings all the time. A post-occupancy evaluation to validate net zero energy, to do an energy audit, benchmarking, and disclose the data like we have in Boston and other cities, and then to recommission, make sure that you're going in periodically to make sure that the building is operating again as intended. And so here are some, like, when it would happen. These are things that could happen after. And then the last thing, and why is all this? You can't manage what you don't measure, right? That's key to all of this.
Thanks, Meredith. So that's the presentation of the Energy Code, the Energy Zero Code proposal. And I just want to return quickly to the Board of Building Regulations and Standards and where this proposal stands in terms of being able to, talk about it at that BBRS, to advocate for it, or to kind of think about next steps for the stretch code here in Massachusetts. And then we'll very shortly turn it to Q&A for the rest of our time today. So I mentioned how, and you heard from some of our other presenters, how the BBRS is one who regulates the building code here in Massachusetts. Their role in doing that is paramount in understanding how you can kind of play a role in interacting with and advocating for code change proposals. So the Energy Zero Code, the EZ Code, has been submitted back in May to the BBRS. I anticipate that there might be an update that's submitted in advance of this next public hearing or this next meeting. The BBRS has regular monthly meetings, so on the second Tuesday of every month they meet. Those meetings are public and anyone can attend. There's not always time for public comment, and it would generally be isolated to those particular provisions or proposals that are on the agenda. Twice a year, however, there's a more open public hearing. In May and November, by statute, there's the requirement for the BBRS to have a public hearing. The next one is this next Tuesday, November 10th, scheduled to be from 10 to 1. The public hearing is usually before the regular meeting, so that would be right around 10 o'clock. When I distribute these slides, the online link there will take you to the BBRS page. As of yesterday, the notice, meeting link, and agenda were not live. Sometimes it doesn't become live till relatively close to the day of, but you will then find it eventually there where there's the notice of the meeting, the agenda for the meeting, and the link to join either through a video conference or a phone-in link or phone-in number. And this upcoming public hearing is the next available opportunity to advocate for a stronger stretch code, net zero code, codes that take you farther toward the climate goals that any of you in your cities and towns are representing might feel the need for. The Energy Zero Code proposal is certainly something that could be advocated for in that venue, as well as are the components that proposal is made up of. The much greater energy efficiency, electrification, and renewables pieces are the major components. And you heard about the jurisdictional requirements as an optional pieces as well. So we really advocate for and encourage municipal staff, local elected officials, municipal stakeholders to provide their municipal perspectives to inform the discussion at the BBRS. At every regular monthly meeting, I think it's important to try to participate and engage. At these public hearings, it's even more important as there's more opportunity to be heard from the public and to let the board know that this is a priority for cities and towns. And the more you can speak to kind of the specific reasons in your communities for why that's so, ways that buildings are being built, or needs that you have, goals that you have, and how you're looking to take advantage of those multiple co-benefits that come from a stronger code, I think are all really important pieces of the advocacy that municipal stakeholders can bring to the BBRS as well as other related meetings. So next Tuesday, for those who are able and willing, we encourage you to attend the public hearing. We also encourage you, anyone can speak or raise their hand to comment or participate in that meeting. Comments are usually 3 minutes or less. We are encouraging folks to consider submitting written comments following the hearing, usually within a week or so of that hearing. MAPC will likely send out a template if it's useful for anyone to structure those comments or have some help kind of putting pen to paper there. And then just encourage you all to stay engaged and possibly attend future BBRS meetings as well. So with that, I want to spend the majority of the rest of our time here together on question and answer. So I'm going to stop my share and go back so I can see all of you and see the comments. So let me first scroll back through and see if I have any questions here in the chat. And let's see, answered that one. And in case someone didn't hear me mention before, or maybe it's when I was on mute earlier, all slides will be available following this meeting. I will send those around, as well as the recording of this session to all registrants of the webinar, and hopefully post it on our website as well. Let's see, here's a question. Has anyone calculated the increased cost to an average commercial building to move to net zero code or decrease? And maybe Meredith, I'll first pose this question to you.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to point you to one of our resources. We put out a cost study on the cost of net zero buildings in Massachusetts about a year or so ago. And what you're referring to, I mean, that actual calculation is going to vary from building to building, right? And that's something that you're going to want to ask your design team to work on. But what we try to do is a phrase called tunneling through the cost barrier, right? Where you will add insulation and make the building envelope more efficient, which ultimately, hopefully, lets you remove units and take those units away to save the cost on those units. And so it might be that you have such an efficient system that you can remove perimeter radiation, right? Perimeter heat to downsize the system as much as possible. But of course, it's going to be a balance, right? And that's something that your design team is going to be playing with how much extra insulation, how much, sometimes even we found with some, one engineer, architecture company has really analyzed the difference that just 1 inch of continuous insulation around the building can make a huge difference in energy performance. And that when they went to 2 or 3 inches, it didn't make as much of a difference. And so those are the type of analyses that we want to see happening on buildings moving forward.
Thanks, Meredith.
Jacob wants to add
Jacob.
something. He's muted.
All right. So we're currently working on millions of square feet of net zero buildings in Massachusetts. And consistently, we've been able to prove to our clients that we can achieve net zero compared to business as usual for less than a 1% construction cost premium. And so we're talking about paybacks in some cases of less than 1 year, in other cases maybe 2 or 3 years, but it's It's well within the pro forma of even our developer clients. Like a large majority of that square footage of what we're working on are for developers. And these buildings are being designed to meet the parameters of the EZ code, and they're pursuing things like LEED Zero certification because there's no code out there pushing them there, but they know that the market is demanding it. Their tenants are demanding it. So this is quite viable and cost effective in our experience. We're also been hired by Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources to perform a detailed analysis of code versus net zero for a number of different commercial building types, including schools, offices, laboratory buildings. And there's going to be a very detailed study coming out in the next few months from the DOER based on our work with them.
Great, thank you to you both. Let's see, I'm just going to go down kind of in order as they've come in to either me or to everyone in the chat. So the next question I have is, why are public health and public safety buildings exempt from electrification? Jacob, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so we literally just took the list from Brookline and said, you know what, someone else went through this process. They got all the community feedback about what buildings may or may warrant consideration for allowing fossil fuels. Anything that somebody could consider would be some sort of a hurdle. We said, for this first pass, let's just make an exception, and then we can tighten it up in the future, but let's get our foot in the door with this first pass and just make it as lenient as possible to start with, knowing that we'll get less pushback that way.
And to Jacob's point, just a reminder to folks that the code is on a 3-year cycle. The stretch code is not required to follow that currently. That might change based on some legislation that's been proposed. But there are chances, hopefully every couple of years, to improve the code, and that would be the expectation. Meredith, I think you wanted to add more.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I see Alicia's question that's related a little bit further down, or comment more about building an all-electric police station in Medford, which is very commendable, and that's really exciting. I think to Jacob's point, it's looking at, not everyone is going to do that, and there are people who are going to push back for particular building types, and so with an effort to get this through, to be able to have some lenience there.
Just a reminder too, that just as Medford's doing, building code doesn't preclude anyone from building more efficient buildings. Cities and towns cannot require requirements that go beyond the building code currently, but they certainly can take those steps if they choose to, both public and private buildings.
We're clearly preaching to the choir here, so thank you. We know we can go further. We're just trying to get something passed to start with.
And then there was a question that I think, Meredith, you possibly already responded to around natural gas or diesel generators, if I'm looking kind of in the right place, that there is the resilience aspect of that, and why generators are part of that exception list as far as we know.
Yeah, I think that's all related to the same question. That was all
right.
part of the same question about why those buildings are exempt.
Great.
Yeah.
Then the next question is, what is the cost trade-off of increasing building construction efficiency versus reducing the number of air source heat pump units required?
Yeah, so we've done a lot of this analysis, and that's part of why we targeted those specific areas that are really low-hanging fruit on the load reduction side. So going to triple glazing is very cost-effective. Going to more efficient heat recovery is very low-hanging fruit. And so those are definitely more cost-effective when you take into account the fact that you can reduce the amount of mechanical infrastructure, including heat pumps, by reducing those heating loads. And so that's definitely a trade-off that we've used on our own projects, and have that professional experience to know that that's the right choice from a cost perspective.
Great. Then we have, can you explain what decisions, approvals, if any, are before the BBRS or EAC, which is the Energy Advisory Committee of the BBRS, one of the committees that they have, regarding either of the code proposals or stretch code revisions? In other words, when we are commenting, what specifically should we be pointing to? It's a really good question. So for the public hearing, there doesn't have to be something in particular that you're pointing to. You could make more general comments about the types of things that you want to see, or other kind of specific recommendations that are being made that either directly relate or do not directly relate to specific proposals in front of the BBRS or the Energy Advisory Committee. For regular meetings that are not in those public hearing schedules, in order to have a chance of commenting, you will usually need to directly relate your comment to something that's on the agenda or a proposal that they're considering. In order, though, if you wanted to kind of understand how best to relate the comments that you're making to what is in front of those bodies, Currently, the BBRS has the zero code, which is the AA zero code that Jacob referenced earlier in the presentation, was submitted to the BBRS back in December, I believe, and has been with the EAC, the Energy Advisory Committee, for their review. The Energy Zero Code, the EZ code, was submitted to the BBRS this past May. So that is something that is in front of them. It has also been reviewed at times by the Energy Advisory Committee. Slightly unclear right now which of those bodies, if either, are still considering it. But they have been submitted to them and are certainly something that a public comment could reference. And as I mentioned, my anticipation is that an update to the zero code will be submitted before this coming November 10th meeting. So comments could also reference the updated EZ code if that too is on the agenda or has at least been submitted before that time, and we can update you on the status of that. In terms of other stretch code revisions, the expectation is that the stretch code will be updated in one form or another with this next code change, as Meredith mentioned, in 2022 when the 10th edition comes in. But we have no other further updates on that, and so there's no other pending stretch code revisions as far as I know currently in front of either the BBRS or the EAC, though as Jacob mentioned, there's a lot of work that DOER is doing in terms of modeling and understanding what the different proposals could be moving forward. Jacob, Meredith, I don't know if you have other things you want to add to that.
I think the main thing is, we need municipalities and representatives from towns and cities to say, these are our goals as a town to meet our climate goals. We need a net zero stretch code to do that. And the EZ code is the embodiment of those requirements in code. That is what we need specifically. That to me is the simplest message.
I think that's right. And even if it's, it's really calling out the specific components that are most important or, integral to the work that you're doing in any of your cities and towns, if it's the energy efficiency category or component that's of, of paramount importance, or the electrification or the renewables, or, 2 or 3 of those that you want to really raise up in the comments that are made, that's certainly an avenue to take as well. Great. So next question was it said that winter peak load is no higher than summer peak load using heat pumps with the EZ code? I think that was a slide that you had talked through, Jacob.
Yeah, that is correct. In our experience, when we are able to reduce the heating load by having a better envelope and more effective heat recovery, when you use a heat pump to make that heat and you measure that peak electrical demand, it will be lower than your peak demand in summertime. And so you're not making a higher peak overall. When you look at the highest peak of the year, it's still going to be in the summer like any normal building today. And that's a big driver for us in terms of setting those load reduction strategies, because when you look at cost, you have to look at the cost to the building, the developer or builder, right? You also have to look at the cost relative to the broader community, because ultimately we're all paying for the grid infrastructure and in some ways also all of the environmental impacts. Our children will be paying for those, but you can at least draw a bigger circle than just around the building and look at, well, what are all the grid impacts? And so we needed to make sure that while we were moving toward an electrified solution, that we were not increasing the demand on the grid, which would then have a negative cost impact to the broader community. And so we want to make sure that was clearly addressed. So we're making sure that that peak heating load in winter is lower than the peak cooling load, so you're not increasing the grid demand at all.
Thanks, Jacob. The next question is, does the proposed code have any requirements for major renovations?
So that is focused on new construction. A major renovation is not triggered for stretch code currently, and we're not proposing to trigger it for the EZ code. We absolutely agree that in the future we need to move in that direction. But again, we're trying to take one bite at a time here to get something that will be adoptable essentially.
I'll add that the code doesn't have that, but we do know, the city of Boston is leading by example and looking at a cap on carbon emissions from existing buildings, and are in process of, they just rounded out a series of working groups that they have on that, and that's 100% focused on existing buildings. And so we're looking forward to see what comes out of that on the existing building front.
Yeah, I'll also note that the state is working on the update to the Clean Energy and Climate Plan, which at least a draft should be out by the end of this year, so within the next 2 months. And I expect to see a lot of policies recommended in that plan that will also look to tackle emissions from existing buildings. There's 2 million buildings or so that are in service now in the Commonwealth that will still be standing in 2050, and obviously many more that will be built that will then go through major renovation. So it's a huge piece that we need to tackle. Um, Let's see. And then there was a question, many towns are almost all residential. What did you say a timeline might be for an easy type code for houses? And there's actually a committee that's just started working of some of the same partners from those have been working on this commercial code and many others who really specialize in residential design, construction, engineering, and so on that have started to write a companion residential easy code. Jacob or Meredith, I don't know if you want to say any more about that timeline.
Yeah, I think that they would ideally be targeting a submission for the May BBRS public hearing.
Yeah, that's my understanding. So there are, as you all know, a large number of buildings that are residential in the Commonwealth that this would not apply to, and so the hope is that that is looking to touch those buildings. Sorry, Meredith.
I wanted to just add that there are some great new resources out there on the residential side in terms of net zero. If you haven't seen the design guidelines that Boston put out, they have some great things in there. But then just this past week or so, Rocky Mountain Institute put out a resource on the cost. They updated a guide that they had on the cost of zero energy buildings, particularly looking at residential, and looked at, I think it was 6 or 8 different cities, including Boston. And the answer was that it's a big win from a financial standpoint to go zero energy. I can go and get that link right now and put it in as well as we are answering questions.
Thanks, Meredith. So another question asks, would this new code need to be adopted or would it automatically apply to already adopted stretch code communities? As currently drafted, it would replace or amend the current stretch code appendix, which would mean as have previous updates to the stretch code that would apply to all existing stretch code communities and as well as any new communities that adopted the stretch code. Let's see, this next one was just to me, but I'll share it out. Do current code proposals call for techniques for wall structures to prevent wall heat transfer by structural components? Hopefully I'm understanding that right. I don't know if you want to take a try at that, Jacob. Otherwise, we can try unmuting the folks who submitted that.
I think it's asking about is thermal bridging, like of metal studs or Z-girts, things like that that are in a
Got a
wall.
thumbs up.
Okay, accounted for. Yeah. So the current code does require you to account for thermal bridging in your calculation of compliance for the envelope. So that is already in the current code, and we would just basically build off of that and make some of the requirements a little more strict. So we're not really changing that fundamental, calculation methodology that the code currently has.
Great. So I know there's a number more questions in the chat. My hope will be that we might be able to get some more of those answers and send them out when we send out materials, since we'll only have time to go to one more here. There were some questions about templates for comments and other follow-up. MAPC's hope is that we will be sending out that likely following the public hearing next Tuesday, as we found it to be helpful to be informed by that session in order to put together those comments and see how different perspectives can be most helpful to the BBRS. Though if anyone does want some help in providing comments to provide at the hearing itself, definitely feel free to let me know. So the last question I just wanted to ask folks about that came up in the chat was, with the optional jurisdictional requirements, it seems like a community would have to dedicate staff to manage any requirements that occur post certificate of occupancy. Do communities generally find they need to hire new staff to manage these processes? I think as Meredith mentioned, these would be optional components that a city or town could choose to adopt. And if they did, they might find the need. Building inspectors and others that work in the buildings departments and inspectional services departments in cities or towns may be able to take on those responsibilities. But there might be the need, depending on which of those jurisdictional requirements are adopted, to bring on some more staff capacity. But really, we're trying to address what some other communities and some other code precedents have included, such as embodied carbon retrocommissioning, that are obviously very important to decarbonizing our buildings, but we didn't see as likely to be included as a mandatory code for the whole Commonwealth. Meredith or Jacob, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I agree. We just didn't want to put any burden on anybody in a town level that didn't want that added responsibility. So that's why it's optional.
Exactly. Great. Well, I know we're at time. So again, I would just encourage everyone to continue to stay involved and engaged. Feel free to follow up with me, with others that are on this in this info session, or that have been participating in this in this effort that you might already be connected to. We'll send out materials, the recording, the slides, as soon as we can. And I'm also just going to share my screen here before you all leave, for those who are still here, just that has our website on it, if I can get that up. But otherwise, thank you all so much for attending today, and for all of your interest and really very smart questions that you were able to share with us today. And I'll attempt to get through the rest of those and send answers from our experts here as soon as I can. So thank you again to everyone. Thank you again so much to our presenters.
Yeah, thanks so much to everybody for the opportunity to present. And I think it's so important to stress that we can come up with all kinds of great ideas, but you are the ones that get to push this over the finish line. We can't do it as professionals. The towns and cities have to demand this. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen.
Well said. And with that, I will say thank you to everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Take care.
Thank you.